Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth Podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello, and welcome back to the Wade Borth, the continuation of my conversation with Tarisa Shelton, a good friend of mine, fabulous soul, exciting person to be around. How's that for an intro, Tarisa?
Wow, I don't know. It's got me real juiced, Wade. Thanks for having me again.
You bet. I am so excited to have you on here to continue our series. We did part 1 and part 2. We talked about the process and the why. And now we're going to get into a little bit more detail and talk a little bit more, maybe about a little bit more down the nitty gritty. And I think it's important for people to understand that are listening. When we talk about infinite banking, and again, this is your journey into and through infinite banking and where you're at now. And it's funny how, at least in my world, what I thought was important, how I thought 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago when I first got into this thing is so different than what it is today, or today is so different than what it was back then. And so I guess I would encourage every listener to understand that as you go along, and I call it a journey because it's not an event, it's not a place that you end up. It is more along the lines of, I'm changing my life for the rest of my life. And so as we do that, our perspective is going to change. And now how we think about things is going to change. And really what we're trying to do with this podcast, A, is to get you to understand how I think, which is fine, how Tarisa thinks, which is fine, because, again, we're in different parts of our journey. But more importantly, just to have you understand that how you see it isn't wrong, right? How you're in your position, you're in your spot. As you're looking at this, maybe you're brand new and you're thinking, hey, I'd love to know more about this. Or you might say, I've been doing this for 5 years, I've been doing this for 10 years, but I can resonate with Tarisa, I can resonate with Wade, because what they're saying and the experiences, the emotions that they've gone through in the process are exactly what I'm going through now. So just know that there are other people out there that are going through the same thing that you're going through. And I was having a conversation with a different person earlier today, and she made the comment of, man, it's just, I felt like I was so alone in my thoughts and my feelings and my emotions. But once I get around and understand there's a lot of people out there that have in the same position as I am, I don't feel so alone anymore. I feel more empowered. I don't know if that's kind of where your thoughts are at as well, Tarisa.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always an evolution of thought and expansion when you're dedicated to not having the arrival syndrome, right? Yeah. So it's like this thing that just unfolds and it builds as we continue along this process and honestly just continue life in general. So I would full-heartedly agree with that sentiment. And I think it's great to know that at one point we were all at the beginning stages of this. And the point is we took that journey and look at where we're at now. We get to share this message with other people and help them, guide them along this process.
Yeah, that's what's so fun about what I do, and I know you would agree as well, is that we encourage people to ask questions. I don't want to shut down questions. I love people that ask great questions, thought out questions, and even what they would consider dumb questions. But it's like, if we can empower people to grow their knowledge, how much more fun can you have in any profession than just doing that? We get paid to help people grow their knowledge and their understanding. That's going to give them the freedom and the control that they're looking for in their world. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really the content, and that's why it's so exciting for me. So with that, I'm going to go back and just review a couple of notes, because, again, this is the part 3, and I'm just going to encourage you to go back and listen to part 1 and part 2 of the interview with Tarisa. But just to review some of the notes from those previous parts, right? We talk about the infinite banking, and there's really 4 steps that I identify. One is understanding what the problem is. And we talked about that in the previous podcast. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to those podcasts. So what is the problem? And we say, who's out there raising their hand saying, I want to look for somebody to help me down this path? And then understanding the process is point number 3. And the 4th one, which again, I think it has to go in that order, for you to have a good understanding, is like, what products are you using? What are you using to warehouse that capital, that money that you need if you're in the financing business or the banking business, especially your own banking business? Where are you storehousing your dollars? And so today we're going to touch on a couple of those points, and this is always an interesting one when we start talking about when. We're going to talk about when a person should be taking action. And I don't know, Tarisa, what's your thoughts? When you were first started, if I recall right, you're pretty much a quick start. Is that fair to say? You saw something, you read something, you...
Fact finder. Yeah, interestingly enough. But I was looking for IBC for a really long time. I was searching for it. So when I found it, I was like, okay, this is what I've been looking for. I'm ready to go. But that's because I had done a lot of kind of upfront reading and thinking right before. I'm a very logical decision maker. So when something makes sense to me, I'm okay moving quickly on it.
Gotcha. So when you're talking with clients, you think about those clients, and how many times have you heard this? When should I start this? What's your response to that?
It depends on if I want to make them feel bad or not. I'm just kidding.
Wow.
I just really the best time to start this was when you were a baby. Hopefully your parents started it for you. And if that is not the case, then I always say the best time to get started is right now. And I can't remember who says this, if it's you or Kyle, but it always resonated with me. It's if you wait to get started, you're not going to see that pain point now, but you're going to see it on the later years of the contract. Like the most efficient years of the policy are towards the end. And so what you're doing is you're limiting your ability to have access to that significant increase of cash and death benefit towards the later part of your life, when I would argue it's more important to have access to both of those things.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that it doesn't get better. Today is the perfect day. And it was interesting when I did actually a presentation at the IBC think tank, and the question was, what does a perfect policy look like? And my answer to that, my whole presentation, were you in that one? I don't know if you caught that presentation, but...
No, I wish. I missed out. I'm going to have to go back and watch the replay.
My whole point was the perfect design, the perfect policy you can have is the one that you actually start. I mean, I have so many clients. I don't have so many clients. I have a number of people I know that, for whatever reason, are looking for the perfect time. And rarely does a perfect time ever happen in our lives. I mean, I think about when we had our son, right? Well, was it the perfect time? Absolutely not. Did we make it the perfect time? Yeah, we did. It's kind of what you make of it at that time. People say, when they ask me that question, of course, the old answer is, the best time is, like you said, when you're 8, 10 years old or 15 days old, whenever it is, start the process and start the education as soon as you can. The second best time, and the one that we can control, is when? Now, right? Yep. And so that's such a good point, is like the longer we wait, the longer we have to defer the benefits that we get from doing this type of thing. And so along that same lines, some of the other kind of misconceptions around when we should get started is most people think that they have, I shouldn't say most people, that's overgeneralization. Some people think that they have one shot at doing this. Mm-hmm. And what would you share with people out there that are listening, your experience with that?
That's a great point, Wade. And I would say the same. It's like one of those things when you have something new and different that you're not 100% sure how the experience of that thing is going to be, you're inherently going to want it to be absolutely perfect. And so when people are first getting started, my conversation with them is along the lines of, your first policy is going to be your learning policy, right? When you actually start using this process and you understand how simple it is, and you know what it's going to do for you and your family and your business, you're inherently going to want to add on more. So don't put the pressure of perfect on this first policy. Just have it be meaningful to you, right? It's going to accomplish what you need in this moment, but also manageable. You can afford those premiums that are being paid inside of that policy, and it feels comfortable. Because that's how I first started out. I mean, arguably, when I first started, I think I bit off a little bit more than I could chew, but it's because I had done so much research prior that I was like 100%, 150% in, honestly. I was like, let's do this. But now that size of that policy seems so much smaller compared to what I've added on over time as I've increased my understanding. And so I like to tell people this is like your first policy, honestly, is like your first baby step. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a little awkward and a little bit wobbly. But the point is you're learning how to do this process so that you can eventually walk with confidence along this path.
Yeah, that's a fabulous point, because this is a lifetime journey, right? You think about, that's a great analogy, right? That first baby step. How many more steps do we make after that first baby step that we have in our life? Hopefully many, right? Hopefully you have able to do millions of steps. But it's a lifelong journey. And that's the same way here, right? If we go back to Nelson Nash, who wrote Becoming Your Own Banker book, the infinite banking concept, right? So he said it is a system of policies over a lifetime, because hopefully your income grows, your knowledge, your understanding, your perspective. It goes back to what I said earlier. As we got into it, our first days of looking at this are so much different than our eyes that are looking at it today. Hopefully they're more refined, they're bigger ideas. And so therefore, again, the thought is it's not just a one-shot opportunity. Hopefully we have multiple policies over a lifetime to create a system.
Absolutely. Because I think too, what you're saying about Nelson, it's a system of policies. So it's as your income potential goes up, as your influx of cash goes up, you're always going to need a container to stick those dollars. And more often than not, the first policy that you started is hopefully going to be capped out when that starts to happen. Yeah. And so it needs to be sustainable growth. But like you said, it's based off of increasing your understanding in order to make that happen over time. Yeah. And it's my favorite thing to think about that kind of evolution of growth. And Nelson talks a lot about that in his book about he was in forestry. So it's like you're planting seeds and then you're harvesting the fruits of that labor. And you don't ever want to cut down the tree. You just want to keep perpetuating that same process.
It's the apple orchard idea. Plant the seeds, take some time, nurture, and then when it comes time to gather an apple, don't cut down the tree to get to the apple. Find a way to pick it. That's the idea.
Yeah, exactly. So, we want to grow some trees.
Yeah, exactly. And it is so true. I look at my very first policies, and again, there's no magic in the number of policies we have. I have clients with a handful, but they were what I would consider very hefty to begin with, because the individuals knew what they wanted. And actually what I think was real helpful is that they had found a mentor, and I'll take a little bit of credit for this. They found a mentor or somebody that understood it, that kind of gave them the advice. Don't buy the house that you need for the family that you size now. If you plan to add 4 or 5 kids, maybe buy a house that has a couple extra bedrooms. That idea, and a couple of those clients I can think of right now, they took that and ran with it. And they said, hey, I'm going to build this thing because I know I'm going to grow this thing. The confidence was huge. And now they've grown into their policies, and now they have more money, more cash flow, that now they are starting their second or third or fourth policy type of thing. Nelson talked about don't be afraid to capitalize, and that's really what he was getting at. He understood just from years of doing this, he understood that what we think is big today is not going to be big tomorrow.
Absolutely. And that's especially true of people that are growth-minded. Where they're at today is going to be a completely different person, honestly, like a year or two from now, as they should be. We should always continue that path of growth and just becoming better people. So I like that.
And I think one of the other things when we talk about win is maybe even along the lines of, and you've had this with some of your clients, maybe this is your personal story. The first person, maybe in your family, in your group, the people you know, that says, I'm going to lead. I'm going to take the first step, and I'm going to be that person that's going to show my family how to get out of being in bondage to the banking system, as it were, right? Teaching people how to take control of their lives through that process. And I don't know if you ran across that, or if you got a story behind that you want to share.
Yeah, sure. In fact, I was having a conversation just the other day with someone, and she was sharing with us that she realized, watching her parents grow older, that all of that work led them to be in a place where they still needed additional help. They didn't set themselves up because they weren't necessarily thinking 20, 30, 40 years down the line of, is what we're doing working? And if not, what does that look like for our family? And what she said was, I've watched them work 30 years and it just didn't work out for them. And I don't want to repeat that process. And I think that's where a lot of people end up finding infinite banking, is because they see how things play out and they're not interested in having those same results for themselves. That's exactly my story. I saw my dad work really hard. I saw my mom work hard as well in raising kids. And it just seemed like the system was against progress, right? It's like we were always perpetually starting over. And I think that's why I just love infinite banking and what it provides for people so much, because how I look at it is, once you start this and you have the proper education behind it, you and your family will never have to start over ever again. You are creating this waterfall of resources, because our need for cash throughout our lifetime is an incalculable amount. We have no idea what that number is. And if we can solve for that need by money we've already earned, by putting it in a place where we have ownership for our family, what that means is they will never have to use outside financing. They will never have to ask someone who doesn't have their best interests at heart for permission. And when that person passes away, they're left with a tax-free death benefit windfall. So I'm a very visual thinker. And when I was first learning about this, what I saw was once you metaphorically plant that tree, you will never run out of trees. And I think that is such a beautiful gift to give the people that you love the most. And by saying, hey, I'm okay being a little against the grain. I'm okay being a little different because I want different results if nothing changes. And I think there's a lot of resistance sometimes when we're having conversations with people about having them rethink their thinking. But it's true. It's if you want to follow the path that is wrapped up in a shiny bow for us, if you see that play out for most people, it doesn't really end well. And I was so committed to not perpetuating that same thing. So by being that leader in your family, by being courageous and taking different action, and what you're doing is you're creating a generational solution to a generational problem.
That's fabulous advice. Generational solution to a generational problem. Because we think about that. How many families are out there that are generationally poor? That for whatever reason, there's a number of reasons we can talk about, but a lot of it is because they don't know any other way. They don't know a different pathway. And there might be some other reasons, but how can 4, 5, 6 generations all end up in the same spot? And it's not really anything else besides probably conditioned thinking and lack of better habits. Because I think this is a great country. I think there's tremendous opportunities. But a lot of times, again, when I was growing up, the last thing we talked about was money at the dinner table. And why was that? I don't know if it was just because maybe we didn't have any, so it was nothing to talk about. But even if that was the case, I guess I find it interesting now, 50 years later after having those conversations, that we just didn't have those conversations. But it just wasn't part of our family style to talk about money anytime. That was a real private thing. And I think that, I don't want to say held me back because I am who I am today because of those experiences you have when you're a child. But I look at it and think, man, how much further along could we had? And you look at the successful families, that's usually the first thing they talk about is those dollars. How are you gonna be good stewards of those dollars? It's not the money that's super important. It's the knowledge and understanding of how to get the money and how to keep it.
Absolutely. What good is a perfect tool if you have no idea what to do with it?
Yeah.
It doesn't really, it's irrelevant. And I like that you said it's two different behaviors. Making money and keeping money are two different skill sets. And if you're not great at the second one, I almost feel like the first one doesn't matter. I can't remember where I heard this, but it just resonated with me so much. And it had me thinking about savings in a different way. He said, I wish I remember who it was, but he said he met with someone who was making over $300,000 a year, and he was saving less than $10,000 a year. And he was like, man, that guy was working really hard for $10,000 a year. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Even if you make a ton of money, if you can't keep any of it, you are working really hard for $10,000 a year.
Making somebody else real rich.
Absolutely.
That's what he's working for. I love that. I hadn't really thought of it in that sense. That's great. Great understanding. So I'm just going to repeat that back to you because I found a couple of ahas there that as we work, we look at what we save. And I'm going to ask you to do this in a second too. And we did this in the previous podcast, but I think it's really important. The idea that when you get people to visualize how much money is flowing through their hands. But I think about what you just said. So you think about it. If you make $300,000 a year and you're only keeping 10, that's what you're keeping. If we talk about, we have some of our partners that we collaborate with are strong into the profit first idea. And if you don't take profit first, who are you working for? You're working for the cell phone guy. You're working for the guy that mows your lawn. You're working for the auto dealer. You're working hard. You're putting shoes on everybody else's feet, but you're not putting shoes on your own family's feet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then again, it goes back to, and then who always wins in those transactions? Let's take it back to the process of banking, right? If you save money to buy a car, the bank wins. If you borrow money to buy a car, the bank wins. And anything else, right? Because they win on either side of that equation. So the question is, why don't you love yourself and your family more than you love Wells Fargo?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to go back to, like I said, something you said in the previous podcast. And again, if you haven't listened to part 1 and part 2 of our previous podcast, I would encourage you to do it because there's some real gems there. But one of the things that I was thinking about going into this one was, that exercise you have people go through. And if you don't mind just sharing that with the listeners again, just in case they haven't heard it in the previous podcast.
Sure. Yes. I love walking people through this because, like I said, I'm a very visual person, and money is logical and it's mostly emotional. So what I like people to do is I want you to close your eyes and think about all of the money that you've ever earned and ever spent during your lifetime, and actually come up with what you think that number could be. Is it $1 million? Is it $500,000? Is it 200,000? Whatever that is for you, hold that number in your mind. And the follow-up question to that is, of that money that has passed through your hands that you've earned and spent, how much of that do you have in your pocket today? Now, where IBC comes into play is if you had put a portion of those dollars between 10 and 40% inside of an environment where you could never interrupt the growth potential of that money, would you have more in your pocket today? Absolutely. And I'll never forget, because my favorite thing when I'm talking to people is seeing their light bulbs go off. So I was having a conversation with my mom in the car, and she had just recently opened up her policy, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I finally get it." And I was like, yes, that's exactly right. And it's really that simple, because what's happening is we're always chasing the number zero. If we have so much money in our savings account and we go make a cash purchase, we've interrupted the growth potential of that money and we've swapped it for something else. The alternative is true if we finance, like you just said. We go into debt and we pay it off. But either way, the starting and landing point is zero. Whereas if we say, hey, the bank obviously has a much better understanding of the money game than I do. And if I just copy what they do, which is they put money in high cash value dividend paying whole life insurance, and they essentially make loans. That's all they do. They take in deposits, they put money in life insurance that's properly structured, and they have a great loan portfolio. If I can do those three things, then I can essentially model success on a personal level. And that's how I thought about it when I first started my policy, is how can I get as much of my income in here first, because I never, ever want to interrupt the earning potential of those dollars that I've already worked for.
That's so powerful. I mean, that is the message of infinite banking, right? You encapsulated just in those couple sentences. Because I know so many people get caught up and hung up on all the wrong things, right? Oh, the rate of return, or this structure is better than this structure. It has nothing to do with that. It has more to do with those habits you just talked about. And those three places, structuring our mind. And quite frankly, if we really understand it, we're going to take it to a business level. We're going to run our banking business just like any other business we have. And you think about how powerful that is. It's real simple to do. It doesn't have to be complicated. And if it's simple, then let's keep it simple. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. And you start up a separate checking account number 2 and have all your, what I call loan portfolio, going out through that one checking account. And then you make sure that gets paid back with principal and interest, because you want that company, your financing company, to be as profitable as anything else you're doing, right? And then what you're going to discover, and you're starting to discover this now, is that loan portfolio, if it's done correctly, again, working with an authorized practitioner like Tarisa or myself, you're going to understand that loan portfolio can be really your first step, or maybe the second or third step into your passive income stream. Owning the note is a lot more profitable than almost anything else that you can do. That's why banks don't necessarily want your property. They just want the financing of your property.
Yes. And what easier business to be in than to be in a business of selling money? Everyone needs cash. So it's if you could be that person for your family, for your business, whatever the case may be, someone is always going to need access to what you have, because they did not take the time to understand that capitalizing their own system can be a very valuable and profitable thing.
Yeah, those are fabulous words and fabulous advice. So thank you so much for that. Again, Tarisa, thank you for that. That's some insight. And I'm sure we have a lot more we could delve into, but we're going to move into the fourth part of this conversation here shortly. But I just want you to, if you like what you're hearing, give us a positive review on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Give us a thumbs up. Share with your family. I mean, this is a great message to share with your family. If you want to reach out to Tarisa, Tarisa, throw out your contact information if you don't mind.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's my first name, Tarisa, Tarisa, at factumfinancial.com.
Tarisa at factumfinancial.com. Okay. So if you want to reach out to her, that's great. But again, share this with people that you love. Share this with people that you want to maybe grow in this knowledge with. It's much more fun of a journey if you're sharing it with both you or your spouse or your brothers, your friends, whoever it might be that you want to share this with. It's a great message to share. So thank you again for this segment, and I look forward to our future conversations.
Likewise, Wade. Thanks for having me.
If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.